So again, welcome everyone who's on. Looks like we got a really good crowd right now. As Andy Meyer, I think, probably announced, and if not, this also is being recorded on the AMSSM YouTube channel. So any medical students or residents or anyone else interested that would like to watch this will be able to watch it in the future. So really the point of tonight's webinar on behalf of AMSSM and the Fellowship Committee, myself and Casey Batten, is really geared toward our medical students and our residents, and how do you get into a sports medicine fellowship? So we have an awesome lineup of speakers tonight. They're all listed here. I'll introduce now, and then the plan is I'm going to go over just a couple of slides, and then honestly, this is really about interaction. So I love that we can go onto video, keep everything muted, but go onto video, and when you have a question, you can type in the chat. We've also got a bunch of questions that have already been sent to us by respective residents and medical students from throughout the country. So I'm hoping this is a great evening. This should go until about 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 West Coast, and if you're in Hawaii, 5 o'clock. So to start out, Dr. Sam Dixit. Dr. Dixit is an assistant attending physician at HSS. He's also the associate program director for their fellowship, and he's also the team physician for the Knicks and USA Lacrosse. Dr. Melissa Novak is a assistant professor of family medicine at Oregon Health and Science University. She is also a team physician for Portland State University and their assistant fellowship director. Dr. A.J. Monseau is an associate professor and the chief in the division of sports medicine, as well as the program director for the sports medicine fellowship at West Virginia, and also is their head team physician. Dr. Kelly McInnis is the assistant professor of PM&R at Harvard Medical School. She's a physiatrist and also practices Mass General Sports Medicine. She's the director of the Harvard Spaulding Sports Medicine Fellowship. She is also the a team physician for the Boston Red Sox, the New England Patriots, Harvard University, and Suffolk University. We also have Dr. Andrew Gregory. Dr. Gregory is an associate professor of orthopedics, neurosurgery, and pediatrics, and he's the co-director of the Vanderbilt Sports Concussion Center. He's also the program director of the Sports Medicine Fellowship, and he's a team physician for the Nashville Christian School, Vanderbilt University, Nashville SC Soccer Club, and USA Volleyball national teams. Dr. Ashwin Rao is an associate professor in the Department of Family Medicine, the Sports Medicine section, and he's also the program director of their fellowship at the University of Washington. He's also a team physician for the Huskies and for the Seattle Seahawks. My name is Jason Zaremski. I'm currently the co-chair for the AMSSM Fellowship Committee. I'm our co-medical director for the high school sports medicine program here at University of Florida. And also, so we make sure we have representation from all levels of training. We have Dr. Giorgio Negron. He is the current president of the AMSSM Sports Medicine Resident Council. He is a rising PGY4 in about 8 days, I guess, and soon to be chief resident at Emory. And Melissa Jackels, almost Dr. Jackels, she is the president of the AMSSM Medical Student Interest Group. She's a rising fourth-year medical student at University of Hawaii. So for her, it is, if my math is right, 3:43 p.m. right now. So we have no disclosures related to this talk. So honestly, this is really just kind of the nuts and bolts, kind of get very basic logistics out. All of us on this call, especially those of us who are done with training, I should say, get asked these questions a lot. And I try to condense everything really straightforward to make it simple. And hopefully I answer all those questions before we get into the nuts and bolts of everything. So how do I get to be a sports medicine fellow? Well, you got to complete high school. You got to complete college. You need to complete medical school. That should also say, or DO PhD. My apologies for that. You got to complete your internship. You got to complete your residency. And you also got to be board certified. So whether that's passing complex or USMLEs. So in residency, you also have to figure out how to find time. There's lots of stuff to do in addition to what is required to be a good resident physician. Not to pick on Dr. Negron, but he is our resident on the panel tonight, and he will probably tell you that he has certain responsibilities that have to get done. And then there's other things that are kind of, you should get done, but you have to prioritize. And I just put a list here. And honestly, the thing that I put at the bottom should probably be much higher up. Mental health, time for yourself. Obviously, the challenges with COVID in the past year or year and a half or so is really put a focus on mental health more so than it's ever been. But there's always the challenge of trying to find time. When do I say yes? When do I say no? So what is the answer? Well, from a sports medicine perspective, and hopefully some of you get the movie reference. If not, Dr. Rao loves this movie. You have to love it. You know, you're not going to be on ESPN. You're not going to be at Fox Sports. And if you are, it might not be for the right reasons, because someone probably got hurt and got hurt pretty bad. So you really have to love sports medicine. And honestly, for the most part, you're not paid to be the team physician. For the most part, you might get a little stipend here and there when you get up to the upper levels of Division I or professional athletics, but the majority of your income is coming from your job seeing patients in clinic. So I just want to mention real briefly, you know, some objective factors that faculty like to look at when they're considering a sports medicine fellow. This was a study that was recommended that we do, and I'm going to give a lot of credit to Dr. Ashwin Rao and Dr. Irfan Asif. A lot of you might know Ashwin and Irf, and Ashwin is on this call. This was a study that we did a couple of years ago, and it's been published, but I just want to go over the very basics of it. The reason I want to present it, especially for our medical students and residents, is this is objective data that's fairly recent, that is answered by fellowship faculty and fellowship directors from around the country. So the purpose of the study was to identify these factors. And basically it was a survey study, and we surveyed fellowship directors and faculty. And what we did is we comprised different questions to ask about certain factors on a scale of 1 to 10, and we placed value. This doesn't mean the word importance, we placed value. And I'll get into why we did that in a second. So to just take a look, as of 2017, AMSSM's total membership of non-trainees was about 2,330, and we had about a little over a 10% response rate. And if we want to look at just the fellowship directors, we had about 43% of the at the time fellowship directors responding, which is fantastic. And you can see the breakdown right there. And if you actually look at the membership numbers by residency, this is as of 3.5 years ago. Oops, sorry. Actually, the survey nearly matched the membership, as you can tell. But this is also important for medical students and residents who are interested to know, what's the makeup of a sports medicine fellow? Is it only family medicine? What about the less represented subspecialties? And you can see there that they're about 30% or so are represented by non-family medicine trainees or residents. Now, these slides will be available. You don't have to read through this quickly, but what we want to show you is all of the factors that we put in. And I tried to highlight in white the top 3 and the bottom 5, and the rest you can kind of take a look at. But consistently, the 3 most valued factors were the interview, a letter of recommendation from a musculoskeletal and or sports medicine faculty member, and coverage of some sort. You do not have to be, thinking they have to cover at the Olympic level or professional level or Division I level. Coverage at any level, starting at high school, is great. These are also the top 5 valued factors by fellowship director versus fellowship faculty. And again, they're identical. The interview, the letter of rec from MSK or sports med faculty, and then game coverage. The one thing I did want to highlight for you is board scores, and a history of board failure is a little bit higher up on the fellowship director's side, and that's likely attributed to accreditation related issues that core faculty may not have to worry about quite as much. Now, remember I talked about value versus importance. The reason that we came up with that term and use that term is when you look at the lowest 5 valued factors, it's MSK ultrasound experience and then residency in all of the other backgrounds other than family medicine. Why do we use the word value? We don't know if this is important or not. What we hope this means is that it doesn't matter to fellowship directors unless there's a funding related issue where you come from. If you're a good resident and you have attributes that we like, and you do well in an interview, and you have your letter of recommendation, you've had coverage, you're likely going to be a good fellow. We then broke this up by residency background. So these are the top 5 valued factors by all respondents. And you can see in emergency medicine, board scores and history of board failures is 3rd, internal medicine it's 4th, in PM&R and pediatrics, Breaking into the top 5 is scholarship experience, such as research related to musculoskeletal and or sports medicine. And then emergency medicine and PM&R, prior leadership experience, whether that means you were a chief resident or you've led some initiative of some sort. When we look at the 5 lowest valued factors by all respondents based on your residency certification, again, you can take a look that your residency background, for the most part, is in there in some context or another. The other is musculoskeletal ultrasound experience during residency. Now, this is only a couple of years ago, but many residencies throughout the country now have some form of an ultrasound curriculum, as well as many residents have exposure during residency. But if you do not, that does not seem to be a highly valued factor. In fact, it's a pretty low valued factor. So what are the take-home messages? Well, number 1, practice your interviews, develop interviewing skills as a means of strengthening your candidacy. That's number 1. Number 2, please focus on passing your board exams in medical school and for step 3 during your intern year or PGY2 year. And obtain at least 1 letter of recommendation from a physician with a musculoskeletal and or sports medicine background. And of course, provide game coverage at any level of competition in residency. And again, that could be high school, that could be above, that could be below, that could be at the adolescent level, at the youth level. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to stop sharing. Hopefully my computer works. And what I'm going to do is ask the panel, if you can at least put yourselves on video, and I can see folks there. Anyone who is on the panel and wants to be on video, this is very informal tonight. So you're welcome to do that. But if you're not speaking, at least have your audio on mute so we don't have any feedback. So what I was going to do to start, I have in the background a bunch of questions that Melissa Jackels and Giorgio Negron sent in, and then we're going to throw it out there, and hopefully this is going to work well and my computer won't shut down again. So one of the first questions that came from Melissa that she got from a bunch of medical students is, what about location? You know, I'm in Florida. Does it matter if we have candidates coming from Hawaii or Washington State or Maine? So I'm going to throw that out there to our faculty, let anyone jump in. But does location of the candidate matter to you and your programs or from colleagues that you know of?
Jason, I can comment on it. It's Ashwin.
Okay.
I honestly don't care about location. I care about preparation. From my perspective, you know, our program recruits from a national pool, really, at the end of the day, and we consider people from all backgrounds and all areas and all different disciplines, and DO or MD or, you know, international versus US grads. So we don't really care about those things. We do care about other things that, you know, you went through in your in the presentation, which was great. But I would say that regional preference doesn't really matter. I think that we're looking for specific traits in our fellows that will hopefully go out and represent us nationally. So if anything, I like the diversity of geography.
Melissa, you're on the West Coast. Also, what do you think?
Also on the West Coast in Portland, Oregon. I would echo that as well. I mean, I think we've trained people from the East Coast, we've trained people from Midwest and then West Coast as well too. So I mean, it's a year. And so I feel like people usually are able to uproot and transplant themselves for a year, and it's fun just to kind of go to a random place too, if you know that people are interested in. So agreed, it's definitely more important on your experiences, and we are absolutely looking for diversity and want people from all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd echo what's been said. I think if anything, that's probably more on the fellows end, that geography is important. We're sort of geography blind, and I don't actually know of anyone who's not geography blind. You know?
Completely agree. Short answer, no value to location of residency or home location.
So one question that just got put into the chat, and I'll just kind of go back and forth between what's been sent to me and what gets put into the chat. I'm going to throw this one out to Andrew, to Dr. Gregory. What if you only cover certain sports as a med student, as resident? A lot of you on the call know that I love baseball, so I try to cover as much baseball or softball. if you're trying to go to Nashville and Vanderbilt and say, I'm going to cover volleyball constantly and press Dr. Gregory, does that matter to you as a med student or resident, or do they need to have more of a diversity at that level of training? What do you think?
Number one, I think it's a good question. I would say the reality is for most of the non-family medicine residents, the sports coverage is probably less available. And so I'm looking for really any experience that you have. I will say if you kind of put yourself in a niche where you've only covered one specific sport, you have to be very open to covering other sports, because obviously in fellowship, we're going to have you cover lots of things. And so I'm not looking to see necessarily which specific sport you covered, more just kind of a general experience of any coverage at all at any level, as much as you can get.
And then AJ, you're the head team physician at West Virginia. What's your thoughts on that? If you have a resident that maybe is got a lot of coverage, but maybe only in one certain niche, like, you know, the baseball, softball world as an example, and they're coming in, you got Division I big time football there.
Yeah, I think Andrew's right on. I mean, really what it comes down to is we want to see some type of coverage over none. We want to see more longitudinal coverage over event than just single game coverage. We want to see that kind of buy-in if you're able to do it, if you're able to arrange it. Ultimately, a more broad experience will likely translate better, but at the same time, if that's your passion and you're able to do it and be involved with it, that's great. And if you do a bunch of longitudinal stuff, say with baseball, but you're able to hit up, you know, some high school football games here and there, and so that's more of the spotty event coverage, that's going to translate well also. So I think, you know, ultimately it comes down to what, you know, your level of commitment is and what you can get yourself into.
One question that's already been put into the chat was sent to me and has actually already been asked of our current fellowship director at UF is, what's the deal with interviews this year due to COVID? I suspect the answer is going to be based on the state guidelines, but I'm going to let each of the panel comment since they're in different states and in very liberal states versus more conservative states. So I'll let everyone respond, but I suspect that's something that residents you're going to really have to do your research on and be adjustable for, or malleable. But let me throw that out there to everybody. Ashwin, you can go first.
Yeah, it's something that's been on my mind, and I wonder about actually. So the University of Washington and our GME offices basically said we have to do all of our interviews virtually this year again. We did that last year. It was actually really successful. I found it to be actually a good process. Plus, it saves each of you who are on this call who are considering applying some money in terms of flying out to us, maybe factors into some things regarding equity and those types of things, and allowing people to apply from all backgrounds. So I think there's value in that, but there's also value in coming to see us. And unfortunately, that's going to put different programs who are handling this situation differently in different positions. And you guys are all going to have to make decisions based off of different formats of interview style, which is going to be really challenging. And so I imagine that for some of you, you'll go to certain programs and feel compelled to maybe rank those programs more highly if they are places that you're physically going to. But I would try to eliminate that feeling as much as possible and look at all the programs equitably, because there is going to be quite a bit of a diversity this year in how programs apply. But I know at our program, we're going to have to go virtual again. And I have mixed feelings about it, but that's just sort of how it is for the moment for us. And that's what has been dictated to us.
Melissa, what about you guys since you're close by?
Yeah, we're in Oregon, so we've been one of the most locked down states for this whole duration. So I'm not sure that they've mandated or dictated anything, but I can tell you that we really liked the virtual format. So we're probably going to stick with that for this year. I don't know if in the future we'll move to hybrids or something like that, but we really liked it. It worked really well. So
I would echo that.
For us at Vanderbilt, we're in the same position as Ashwin. It's not a state mandated thing. It's an institutionally mandated thing. And so they're telling us that we're going virtual. However, because this process, goes over a long period of time, I would not be surprised at all if at some point they change that. And so I think you just have to be prepared that you have to plan that it could be one way and then it could be switched to another way.
Yeah, we're in the same boat as everyone else. I think, I don't know, I was looking for the email, but I think it's basically we've been strongly advised to be virtual. So it's not an absolute mandate, but it's about as close as you can get right now. And I would kind of echo what Andrew says. This whole process with COVID is always evolving, and if if we're doing as well as we are right now in a lot of states in the fall, maybe things will change.
It hasn't been definitively determined at our institution yet. My guess is it's going to be virtual, but they haven't made a final decision. And quite honestly, I too liked the virtual format in many ways. You do miss out on some of the interpersonal connections and trying to, really effectively communicate on a virtual visit in terms of personality. But overall, the organization of it was incredibly smooth, super easy to run. And you could interview, more candidates than in previous years, and at least at our institution.
And AJ, what about you guys?
Same for us as Kelly, actually. So they haven't made a final decision yet. They've been polling the different specialties and subspecialties to see what the national organizations are saying. And also to echo Kelly's final point, which was we interviewed more people because we knew people were going to be able to interview at more places. And so just, it's a zero-sum game eventually. So we wanted to make sure we did that. And so, if it turns out that we're mostly all going to online interviews again, I would encourage the applicants that, I don't think you have to go crazy necessarily as far as numbers, but I think slightly increasing that at maybe 10% or 20% or something like that as to what you were going to apply to is probably reasonable, given the fact that somebody could interview at my program in the morning and Ashwin's program in the afternoon and be a really strong candidate. So just something to think about.
Yeah, and as just kind of an observation, our fellowship director, who's Jay Cluxton at UF, had told us we had a record number of applications at UF, and I'm pretty sure that is probably something that was commonplace around the country, just because of the timing aspect of things made it. I mean, in some cases, we had someone say they had 3 interviews on the same day because it worked out because of different time zones. So one question that's in the chat. Yeah, go ahead, Melissa.
I want to say something. So about that, that's real tricky. So we had a higher number of applicants. We interviewed the same. We did not interview more, even though we did virtuals. We just chose that we were going to do the same amount. But we did have, in say our orthopedics department for our surgery residents, it was ridiculous. So what they were finding is the top candidates were taking all of the interviews. So we need to be really conscientious that you don't accept interviews that you don't want. That needs to be really important in this virtual format. So I just want to express that a little bit as well too. So we don't end up with the same people interviewing everywhere. So be conscientious of that in your process too.
No, I think that's a great point. One question that was put into the chat, and I know this comes up every year, was a question I had when I was applying years ago. I'll throw it out to Sam. I'll just throw it to you. But the question about adding a 4th letter of recommendation, the majority of applications asked for 3, where 1 is obviously going to be from your chair and 1 from your residency director. So that leaves that 3rd one. What's your personal thought? And then I'll let the rest of the panel chime in about, a 4th letter of recommendation. Is it too much, or is it worthwhile?
That gave me the hardest question, Jason. I would say that I think I look more at the quality of the letters and how well they know the applicant and how highly they think of the applicant, and kind of, are they someone in sports medicine that I know, or that we all know here. I don't necessarily know. I feel like if I answer this wrong, if I say, oh, I love a 4th letter, then I'm going to get a lot of 4th letters in the fall that I have to read through. So I would say to you, I think in exceptional cases, a 4th letter can help to clarify the applicant's kind of background, and I think on a rare occasion I do find it helpful. But I think a lot of times when I do see a 4th letter, it kind of speaks to the quality of the other 3 letters, and I would as an applicant, I would focus on getting kind of 3 strong letters if you can do that.
Anyone else from the panel have other thoughts to add to that, or?
Yeah, I agree with Sam in terms of having 3 strong letters. I think that if you're at a program that has sports medicine mentorship available to you, it's good to get a letter from a sports medicine mentor. Sometimes we see letters that are from people who are not necessarily in sports medicine, and honestly, it's a small discipline. We all kind of know each other in some level, and honestly, I spend a lot of time looking at those letters. That's really important to me, particularly from those who I happen to know. And that's programs across academic and, more community-based programs. There's just a lot of people who are kind of known in sports medicine, particularly the ones who are involved in academics. So I would encourage you, if you're having access to sports medicine mentorship, which I imagine many of you will have, being interested in sports medicine, to get a sports medicine letter. And hopefully when you ask, I would actually make sure to ask, can you write me a strong letter? Because sometimes you'll get a letter and you're like, well, why is this person being asked to write a letter? And I wonder a little bit about the sort of choice there. So just, when you ask whether the person, the letter writer, would be able to offer you and write you a strong letter.
I would echo in too that the lack of a letter from a mentor when you are in a place that I know is very strong in sports medicine. So if I know that you came from the University of Minnesota and you don't have and there's a lot of sports medicine providers that could be a mentor there for you, and you don't have a letter like that, it's not gonna like nix you or anything like that, but I'm just kind of like, you didn't really, and I know these people write letters because I see them all the time. So like it does, I do think about that too. So just to put that out there.
One thing I wanted to add, and this is my own personal experience. So, and Dr. McInnis knows this because I've known her when I was a med student, she was a resident, is I went to a program that wasn't very strong in sports medicine. So I had to sort of reach out beyond my home program. So if you get your 3 letters from your home institution, which you kind of need to, but you do an away rotation, a sports medicine away rotation, which may be tough right now for this upcoming year, depending on which state you're in, that is an instance when I think it might be reasonable. I had the opportunity to do a rotation with one of Dr. Rao's colleagues, Brian Krayback at University of Washington. So he was my 4th letter. But that is a unique instance. And again, I don't know how many opportunities there are available, but if you are a resident, if you are Dr. Negron and says, I really want to go to Seattle for 2 weeks, and you don't get a letter from about the 3,000 sports medicine CAQ physicians that are at UW in either PM&R or family or pediatrics, that is a red flag, which was brought up by Dr. Novak before. So I just wanted to throw that out there. But that's an instance when, and I think that to piggyback what Dr. Dixit said, is it can really add on what you did in a 2 or 4 week away rotation. Again, if they're even available this year. I want to bring back a medical student question. This was written in the chat a little while ago is, well, what if I do coverage or I'm even just shadowing on the sidelines? Should that be put in my application when I'm a senior resident or a junior to become senior resident for applications? I know the answer to this, but I'll throw that out there. Who hasn't spoken in a little bit? Dr. Gregory, you're next up. What are your thoughts on coverage as a medical student when honestly you're probably just shadowing?
My take is that any experience matters. What I'm not so interested in is a comprehensive list of every event you've ever covered. More so it's the longitudinal experience like was mentioned previously. But I think it matters. We realize that your role as a medical student will be less, but I think any experience is important. I would go back to my own experience, which is I think I did blood pressure measurements at a high school situation. And again, to me, that it may not be very valuable, but it's an important experience that I would list. So
I'll ask this one to Dr. McInnis, and this might be a little tougher than the 4th letter of rec question for Sam, so with COVID last year and this year, opportunities to do stuff outside of a clinic setting are very difficult right now. There's limitations of coverage, particularly at a higher level of sport, especially high school, maybe not as much. How would you recommend, particularly to medical students or junior residents, their application may not be as robust as maybe 2 or 3 years ago applicants, just because the opportunity, because the timing isn't there? what are some suggestions you might want to give to applicants within the next year because of that?
Well, I would say that we all understand that, and we're all going to see, everybody's going to have that gap to some extent. It's just been very challenging to get that experience. And so I think that's expected. What I'm going to be looking for is ways that you're spending your time and being productive with scholarly activities, because there was a lot of time for that, a lot of time for writing, a lot of time for research. And so I think that those sections of the CV should be more impressive, and the team coverage I think we'll see narrow until that opens up again. It's you can make an effort to, I think effort's important, so making an effort to be involved in whatever might be possible, like a local gym or a fitness center that's opening up, or just taking it down a notch from more competitive sports to recreational sports, or but I'm not expecting much out of that section.
I'll just chime in, put in a request for coverage of youth sports and high school sports that I think most people are aware. Those things never stopped where I am. So even if you're not covering a college or a professional team, high school and youth sports, the need is there. So you can find opportunity.
And I'm from a place where everything has been stopped. There was nothing happening here for a little while. So, but there are some creative things to do. And, like we just heard, like some scholarly projects and stuff. One of the fellows that we matched coming in this year, they had to do a QI project in residency. So he made his QI project very specifically about physical activity and exercise vital sign. And so he kind of built some things into his program that he already was required to do anyway. So that seemed like something that was helpful and useful for his long-term goals as well too. So, trying to be creative, finding things that you already have to do anyway, seeing if you can twist them into some sort of sports academia, I think is always helpful too.
I would also say there's a fine balance when you're reporting out your different activities about representing yourself versus overinflating or underinflating activities. So just be aware that we all have been reviewing, hundreds, if not thousands of applications, and certainly hundreds a year. And so we're used to seeing that. And it's as Andrew, I think, mentioned, you want to get a sense of your longitudinal interests and activities, and not necessarily like, I covered this event this day, I covered this event this day. And that sort of almost marginalizes some of that activity. It's sort of understanding what your continuity is. And yeah, I agree with everybody else. This is going to be a different time for you, having limited times to cover for many of you guys, especially being residents and sort of being kind of an extra person on sidelines where they're trying to keep people away from everybody else. And so I think we all understand that. That being said, I really value creativity, and I'm trying to figure out how to get around that challenge. And I know that we had a number of opportunities this year, and some of the residents coming through our programs this year, and the ones that I've mentored, have done some really cool things and have really kind of embraced sports med in unique ways. We also had to pivot as a program to figure out how to both teach and learn and adjust. And there were other opportunities that came up within the university here that I think have helped a number of our residents gain experience that was not sidelined. So if you found ways to do that within your own program, be it giving lectures or going out to community events or whatever it is that you're doing, make sure you represent yourself, because I'm interested in understand that maybe sports medicine coverage was limited, but what else did you do with your residency time? How else were you creative? How did you help with the COVID situation in your community? I'm interested in all of that to kind of gauge you as a person in a context of a difficult time.
Sounds like a good interview question.
And something as an example that we're trying to do at UF that we're going to announce soon is we have our annual high school mass physicals, which are, as of about 2 weeks ago, allowed to happen again. We're trying to actually pair it with volunteer opportunities to get vaccines. If you have, your parents there to provide consent. So if you're in a location where maybe there's a QI, as Dr. Novak talked about, that you can do, whether you're a medical student or a resident, talk to your Department of Health, talk to who's in charge of the vaccination program, and say, hey, maybe we can pair these two. And while it isn't quote unquote pure sports medicine, is an initiative that's for the betterment of the community, completely volunteer, but at the same time, you're offering something that maybe is difficult to get, particularly in less socioeconomically challenged areas. I think that would be amazing to read about if a medical student or a junior resident was able to help lead something like that. So I think to kind of echo what everyone has said is thinking outside the box, and saying, okay, one door is closed, well, I'm going to try to open a different door. I think that's something that all faculty are looking for. So this is going to be a nice segue. I'm going to bring in Giorgio Negron. Giorgio was actually a medical student at UF, so I've known him since, were you a second year, I think, or third year? So I've known him, I don't know, since before he had facial hair from the looks of it. But he's someone that rotated with a lot of my colleagues and myself. He came to games. He is at Emory, which is an institution, obviously, that has a lot of sports medicine faculty and many backgrounds. So he's got a lot of opportunities, but he's also ran with them. And, you know, he is also the president of the residents and interest group for AMSSM. So, Giorgio, I was going to ask you, for any of the questions I haven't gotten to, or maybe things that go around in kind of the email on the cloud, what are some things from the residents' perspective that maybe I haven't gotten to yet, or you wanted to ask or bring up, not to put you on the spot? Don't worry, Melissa, you're next. So I'm giving you a little segue there. But Giorgio, what are some things that maybe we haven't brought up yet, or things you wanted to bring up?
That's a perfect, that's an excellent question. From the resident perspective, and particularly thinking outside the box, at least personally, what I've come to see during the COVID era is to try to get into not just into the sports med organizations, but also into your primary specialty organization to see what they're up to. For example, AAP, and the AAP and the AAPM&R for us in the physiatry world have a lot of things going on as well in leadership positions. And not only that, we also have leadership positions available through the AMSSM. So leadership positions, research opportunities, networking, it was just kind of just drilling a lot of your time as a resident into things that obviously you can't go into trying to get sports coverage, but utilizing your time in a lot of academics. So I think one of those things that I want to kind of portray or kind of just share with everyone is that the AMSSM in particularly have a lot of things going on in the academic perspective that we love to have a lot of residents help with in regards to like research projects within the SMRC. We have leadership positions that are coming up for November and December timeline, and then also scholarship opportunities. Those are all kind of things that we can, that I guess can kind of really boost your CV and really can see like, okay, you know, despite these limited sports coverage, I utilize my time with research, utilize my time with leadership, utilize my time in presenting a virtual case poster presentation or a virtual oral presentation. All those are sort of great avenues to kind of boost up that CV.
Awesome. And then Melissa, from your perspective, kind of the same thing, but obviously at the medical student level, you know, not quite at that level yet, kind of still working on trying to figure out which residency y'all are going to and things like that. But from the sports medicine perspective, is there anything maybe a little bit different or that hasn't been talked about yet that Giorgio didn't touch on that you're seeing from your group?
I think he really touched on a lot of the things that I think the medical students kind of face. A lot of us, it's really trying to figure out, you know, what primary specialty do we want to go into and how can we get exposure to that, as well as incorporating sports medicine into what we're doing. I think for the medical student interest group for AMSSM, one of our big initiatives this year has been trying to kind of reach out to medical student interest groups across the country to see, you know, how can we get involved in the community in sports medicine. So I think that that's been another big important part of what we're, for medical students, looking at.
Awesome. And thank you guys again for joining and helping out. A couple of questions have been on the chat. I know Ashwin answered it, but this is always a question. If you are coming coming from a non-family medicine residency, can you apply to family medicine? So if you're PM&R, can you apply to family? If you're internal medicine, it can apply to EM, et cetera, et cetera. If you're family, can you apply to PM&R? And I'll let some of the faculty reply, but the short answer is you're going to have to do your research as a resident and kind of do your due diligence, because even though it typically says on the website, we accept everyone from these 5 residencies, there's some other things you have to figure out about, if you're PM&R and your half-day clinic's going to be an EMG, that probably won't work if you're coming from, let's say, pediatrics as an example, but there are exceptions made. And part of it also depends on funding. But that said, who hasn't spoken in a while? Kelly, I think maybe you're next up. I think that's pretty much the standard answer, but make sure I'm getting this correct.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ashwin has it right. You need to reach out sometimes to the either faculty, program director, or probably more efficient, the program coordinator, and just ask what applicants each program is accepting. And the lists are constantly changing and programs are constantly evolving and new spots are propping up, and so this is not, some of the websites are not totally updated, so you really have to do your homework.
Yeah, I would fully echo that. A lot of you guys are maybe seeking out resources that not all programs are necessarily aware of in terms of what list we're on for who we accept. So I would certainly check if you have questions or if you have particular interest in a program. For example, our program has historically accepted family medicine and internal medicine candidates, but we now have a track specifically for pediatrics that's been going on for a few years. And so that might in some website be out of date. And we've tried to do as much homework on our end to try to update our site, but every program's a little different that way. So I would check if you have questions.
I would say for pediatrics, the American Academy of Pediatrics Council on Sports Medicine Fitness does keep a fairly updated website. So if you get on there and you look it up for which programs are PEDS friendly and which ones are not, it kind of breaks it down as to which ones are accredited through PEDS and which ones accept PEDS. And I think the list is fairly comprehensive and up to date.
I think for internal medicine, I echo kind of what Andrew said, that some programs don't accept IM applicants, but that is changing, and that's definitely better than back in the day when Ashwin and I were applying. Not to age Ashwin, but so I would say you have to, year to year changes, like it was said earlier, and I think I would just make sure you do your research, particularly the summer before you turn in your applications now.
For emergency medicine, ASAP had a list for a while, and then EMRA has worked on a list or a website as well. So those resources are out there. And then I would encourage, for the family med folks or any of the others, when you're looking at the programs, don't just limit yourself when you're searching on the FRIDA website or whatever it is to just your specialty, because just like the family med programs will be open to EM and the other specialties, those of us who are coming from other specialties will be open to family med as well. So,
and can I chime in? I have so us as the SMRC, one of our jobs is to kind of update the fellowship list. So we have, if you go on the AMSSM resident page and you have to log in, there's a sort of tab that's kind of bright red stating fellowship programs in the US and Canada. You click on that and there's a drop down menu that actually spaces PM&R, PEDS, IM, family medicine. Each and every member in the SMRC within their kind of specialty is trying to kind of update that, and that's a good starting point. If you're coming from a different other than the family medicine background and you kind of trying to figure out what fellowship programs do accept you, that'd be a great starting point. And then they also provide the email, provides a program coordinator email as well as the website.
And I know there was another question just put into the chat right now. I think Ashwin answered one of the two. It looks like Andrew just did the other. If you're coming from a non-family medicine background and trying to find out which are the accredited programs, there's various websites within your primary specialties, whether it's AP for pediatrics, not physiatry, or AP PM&R, whether it's for internal medicine. I'm not sure, Sam, which one might have that anymore. I know emergency medicine AJ just put up, but if not, then you can always go through the site that Giorgio just talked about as well. And when in doubt, I think as a resident, Giorgio, you're probably the contact, or there's someone through the AMSSM that can direct trainees or residents to where to look for on the website, which the website is always being updated, but also, and I know Andy Meyer would not like if I didn't say this, please use the AMSM Collaborate also, because a lot of stuff's being posted there. And if you don't know what that is, particularly the medical students on, we can put the link in there. Or if Andy, if you're still on in the background, you can throw the link in the chat. There was something really interesting that I wanted to throw out there. What about the fact that with these ERAS and the virtual interviews that folks are just trying to stack their applications, which we certainly understand. So then what's the point of the interview, especially virtual, if you've got a 20-page application that ERAS makes you submit? And I do understand that. I mean, going through it, once you get through maybe some baseline markers, you're like, oh my gosh, you know, I went through some application from last year. I'm like, I would have never gotten accepted to a sports fellowship looking at these applications. I'm wondering if any of our faculty might be able to comment on that. I mean, that is a real concern, how to separate yourself, I guess, so to speak. I'll call on Ashwin since he's very good about this stuff.
Yeah, you know, that's a great question. I mean, everybody's got different areas of interest and areas of focus. I would, you know, make sure that if you have any areas that you're particularly passionate about, to speak about them in your personal statement. That's a place where you can really personalize your message about what you're looking for. I would also encourage each of you, as you're putting together your personal statement, to discuss at some level, and usually maybe in the last paragraph, you know, what you hope to get out of fellowship, where you hope to end up being, because, you know, our program is really great at training people who go on to careers in, I don't know, in academics, but we also train people in a wide variety of other disciplines. But it gives me a sense for, you know, fit, if a person is really just interested in, say, community care versus maybe doing some more high level stuff, whether they may be a fit. So if you can put some sense, and that might be different for another program, and a program in the community might be more interested in training a different style of physician. So I think having some description of who you want to be will be helpful, but also what you're passionate about will be good. And then also make sure you have great letter writers who can speak for you and are not just regurgitating your CV, because I am looking at all of your CVs. I review every single application, every single letter, read every single personal statement. This year we had 190 applications for 2 spots. And so I do it all. And then I have 2 other faculty do it independent of us. And we compile our list to try to be equitable about things and make sure that it's not just one person representing the person who's being looked at. And so I would say different things will stand out to different people, but try to make yourself as unique. And usually that comes out when you speak about things you're passionate about and you're really invested in.
One of the things I just wanted to comment about is, like, when you fill out the ERAS form, I'm not sure exactly how it asks you for things, but like one of the things we talked about is just sort of the bloat of the application. And so if you have a bunch of just sort of individual things that you did for 1 hour and you're putting those each in individually, that comes into this huge, long sort of form. I've seen multiple applicants go in there and basically use one, and then they list a paragraph under there of like all these individual events. I just want you to know that if you do it that way, I still look at it all. Like, it's like, I think sometimes people feel like they have to write each individually thing down, but I still see it. If you write it into a block and you write like, hey, I did this, this, and this, like, I'll still see that too, just so everybody knows.
One other thing I wanted to mention, so a colleague of ours, who a lot of folks know, Dr. Carly Day, who's the head team physician at Purdue, she loves saying this before she took her current position. She says, and I quote, she says this all the time, Dr. Novak knows what I'm going to say, please don't start your personal statement with, well, I tore my ACL and then I knew I wanted to be a sports medicine physician. We know everyone here has gotten injured. It doesn't mean suddenly, you know, I had a Tommy John injury, lots of other people. We want to know more about you other than you got hurt and now suddenly you want to be a sports medicine doctor. That's fine if you really want to be passionate about that, but go beyond the fact you just injured yourself. Was it the hours spent with a physical therapist or something unique? And I can see Dr. Novak laughing because she's heard this tons of time from Dr. Day. But we want to know more about you than just I sprained my ankle and then suddenly I want to be a sports medicine doctor. Tell us something unique about yourself. It's tough within one page. We all get that. But that's just a plea from many physicians. I'm just calling out Carly because she's the one that's usually most vocal about it. But I'll let if anybody else wants to chime in about that.
Are you sure you didn't mention that Tommy John injury on your application, Jason?
No, because I didn't have surgery and I just rehabbed it. And that was really good for people.
Oh, okay. You know, the thing that I'd add to the personal statement, because, you know, we read so many of these, and quite honestly, it can be nauseating because so many of them are very similar. And so what I am looking for is a little bit of personality to come out, you know, a little bit of like Ashwin said, a little bit of passion for something, a little bit of spark and energy for, I don't know. I'm just looking for a little, like, I'm looking to extract what are you like as a person, not necessarily a list of what you did, and absolutely not a regurgitation of your CV, because I already have that. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would echo that. I think, yeah, I've definitely seen those, I guess maybe the same applications with the ACL tear over the years. And I think there's a couple words that came up. I think someone used the word effort and creative. And I think you really want a chance to separate yourself from people that you're applying, for this position against, I guess. And I think, how are you different? How are you going to be a good fit for the program that you're applying to? And that takes thought, that takes effort, and that takes creativity to express that. And I think the ACL is sort of an easy route. I have both my ACL, so that's not what I wrote about. But I would say in general, I think, why are you interested in our program is what we're looking for. And I think you should be asking the same question of us. You know, why are we interested in you? And that's what the application is, your opportunity to sort of sell yourselves.
I'll put a plug in for something I talked about the last time we did this at AMSSM, which is advocacy and service, that I think we can get kind of overloaded with sports medicine coverage and rotations and things like that lots of people look similar. But if you are passionate about an advocacy project or a service project, AMSSM has avenues of doing that, of getting funding. But it really doesn't have to be sports medicine related. To me, it's just really what are the other things that you do that aren't sports medicine?
Yeah, I would fully echo that, especially in this time where maybe some sports medicine experience has gone by the wayside, to show other ways where you stand out. Our program, the way I've sort of refined how we think about it, is we're really looking for people who are leadership driven. So if you're really passionate about some particular area of medicine, that you were really invested in, that is really helpful for me to understand, because we can train you up. We don't really need you to have a ton of sports medicine training, but we would obviously like you to be very amenable to that training. And so I would like to see those types of traits more so than, I covered 100 different events, in minuscule detail. I think that it's just sort of, it's just as relevant to talk about what you're interested in beyond sports medicine as it is some of the things within sports medicine based on where you are now.
And I would totally echo that piece on leadership. Like, we really, at least at OHSU, we're really looking for folks who's going to make a difference in sports medicine in the future. And just as Ashwin mentioned, that doesn't mean you've had to be a leadership position within a sports medicine piece. But I want to know how are you changing things? How do you want to change things? I don't want to know that you want to do ultrasound. I know you do. Like, I know that. And so, anyway, it just really like focusing on things that you're passionate about and things that you've done, I think would be really helpful. But yeah, that leadership piece is huge.
I want to bring AJ in because I don't think I've gotten you to talk yet. Did I just cut you off?
Yeah, that's all right.
Then go ahead.
Right.
Go ahead. I was going to ask you a question.
My computer caught what you had there at the beginning, I think, for a while. So yeah, I mean, I would obviously agree with what everybody has said. I think being creative at this time through COVID, which so many of us have had to be creative, I think is a really great thing to help your personal statement and show some initiative, show what you did as far as that went. And then obviously things outside of sports and outside of medicine, even, advocacy or whatever it is that makes you, is what we want to know about. I want to know the type of person I'm getting. That's going to be many times a better indicator to me of success in the future is, kind of what makes you tick, as opposed to how many football games were you able to get to. And the CV bloat, which is so easy to fall into, especially in the format that it is. I would just caution you a little bit against that. And, I said this last time we did this as well, which is don't lie. Yeah, if you're going to put something on your CV, absolutely do not lie. It's so basic. And it seems like, I'm sure many of you are shaking your heads like, of course, but it happens. It happens every year. And this is such a small community that if you put something on there that sounds just a little too much for a resident to have done, we may be checking up on that because, we just don't want to see that on an application.
So there was a really good question that just was posted, and I wanted to mention it out loud. There's a question about IMGs. I would throw in their J1 visas, and it wasn't mentioned, but H1B visas as well. Interesting that got posted. There was an email exchange going around. Ashwin, I don't know if you were on that one or if that was Irv, but it basically got routed to myself and to Casey Batten, who are as I mentioned, the co-chairs of the AMSSM Fellowship Committee. And we basically made a 4-question survey that should have gone out to all of the current fellowship directors in the country. So some of you on the panel should have gotten that. And basically, we're just trying to find out which programs or how many programs are actually allowing the sponsorship for those visas. And if so, would they name the program? So there currently is not a list available. So at the current moment, my best advice is you're going to have to contact the respective programs. But we are hoping to have some data, fingers crossed, sometime in August or September. But that 2-minute survey just should have gone out, I think, in the last week, if I have my dates correctly. Anyone else on the panel who currently is a fellowship director, if you want to chime in on that. But that ironically enough, is something that is a small initiative that Casey and I just got going with the help of the AMSSM staff.
Yeah, thanks for doing that. That's an important list to have, particularly for people who are coming from abroad or who need visa support. We have to, again, play by our institution's rules and would love to be inclusive of everybody. Our program does happen to sponsor J1 visas if that is the situation that needs to happen. But everybody's a little different. So I imagine that's another area where if there's not truly a comprehensive list, or if your program you're interested in is not on the list that Jason and Casey have compiled, then you would want to once again inquire with each program, because you don't want to be led down by a requirement that you can't meet.
Our situation is that our state has requirements about licensure that affects international graduates. And so it is not an institution problem for us, but it is a state problem for us because we can't get our fellows licensed.
And if there's ever a question, particularly once you're a fellow or even a young attending, this is a shout out to someone who works for AMSSM, Brian Williams. He actually really went to bat for one of our members. So some of you might know Julia Iafredi, who is a PM&R sports medicine doctor in New York. She's affiliated with Columbia, but she's originally from Canada. And when there were some challenges with immigration nationally about 1.5 years ago, they were going to send her back. And actually, Brian got wind of this. She was interviewed on CNN, and that's how he found out. And AMSSM and at the time Tracy Ray was president, went to bat for her amongst a lot of other people to help indicate her importance as a physician into the state of New York. So if there's ever a situation when you're hopefully never in that situation again, but should anything ever come up, there are many resources through AMSSM to help. And Brian is one of those individuals that through Washington, D.C., he's able to help with. So just as kind of a shout out to our staff in Kansas City and Brian, who's based out of D.C., that's kind of a nice little thing that AMSSM is able to do that we didn't know about until the situation came about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. 2 questions that have come up. What about if you work for 2 or 3 years. So you go through your residency and then you're either a hospitalist or you're in a clinic setting or you're working emergency room shifts, and then you want to reapply. So you've been an attending or a full faculty member at least a year, if not longer. Is that a negative? Is that a positive? What's everyone's thoughts on that?
Well, I could speak briefly as somebody who did defer a year between residency and fellowship because I felt like I wasn't prepared enough. I got interested in sports medicine midway through residency, and I didn't really have great mentorship in the first half of my time, and then it got a lot better in the second half. And so I got interested kind of late, and I felt like, gosh, in order for me to be competitive with top programs, from my perspective, I wasn't competitive. And so I used my third year as a place to really build experience and grow my my sports medicine CV in some ways, and make sure that this was something I really wanted to do. So if you can explain why you've been away for whatever reason it is, you know, if it's like, hey, I had military service or commitment there, or hey, I had, you know, a late interest in sports medicine bloom, just make sure to do that. And I think it's probably relevant to your story if that happens. And that's what I did. And it worked out just fine.
Yeah, I would echo what Ashwin said. I think if in that time you've kind of helped to focus your career on sports medicine, I think that's a great thing to do. So I certainly don't see it as a disadvantage.
There's also been a couple questions about, you know, when to apply. Should apply, you know, at 12:01, kind of like Midnight Madness, but, you know, for applications, do I wait a little bit? I think, AJ, I was going to call on you before you chimed in, but just to bring you back into it from your perspective as program director of your program, and everyone else can chime in if they want. What are your thoughts about when to apply within the actual cycle itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously we start going through applications. Yeah, I think earlier is probably better. I think it's just human nature, right? We start going through applications. At the same time, a really strong application that comes in late in my review process may stick in my mind even better. At some point, though, you start to, you put out applications, fill up spots. I think ultimately, get your application together, try to get that submitted. I would say in the first week or two of the process is probably best. At the same time, there are lots of people every year that will get, a strong review and get lots of interviews who submit a little bit later as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak on that too. I would encourage you to get your applications in early, but make sure that your applications are complete. A lot of people kind of start their application and we're sort of waiting around for their application to be finished. I think most of us would say we wait until our applications are complete before we actually send them out to our faculty group to review. So try to get your letter writers to make sure that they're on task, because that's usually where the hangup is. And as I think AJ mentioned, the longer you get into the process, the more likely it is that some of the interview spots are going to be filled. And so we're a program that looks on the day that applications become available and start that process, and then do a couple other cycles as applications come through. But by the time I get to, early September, mid-September, we're kind of already filling up our spots. So I would encourage you to try to, if you're trying to sort of look at that as a factor, to get your applications in as early as is feasible.
So this is one question we haven't gone to yet. Coverage on a sideline. What if the resident is not the same background as you are? So as an example, we'll go back to AJ as an example. Your emergency medicine, from an acuity standpoint, you probably have the most knowledge of high level on the field procedures that you can do compared to other folks just at a baseline. Do you have any concerns if you have a non-EM resident who is with you, particularly in a contact collision sport like ice hockey or American football or rugby, something like that?
Ultimately, that's our job in fellowship, is to try to, get you to a level where we are, comfortable with you covering whatever sport you want to go out and cover. And that's a bit on us. There are obviously some resources out there for that, in addition to the fellowship of the SMART course or SMARTest, whatever we're calling it now. So, there's those things out there. Yeah, I mean, just like with any other subspecialty or specialty coming into our subspecialty, is you're going to have your strengths and weaknesses. At the same time, for myself, when I went into fellowship, having some more of that longitudinal clinical experience was what I needed more instruction on, and was able to get that through the fellowship. So I think it's our job ultimately that, I don't need you coming into fellowship as a full-fledged sports medicine physician. That's our job, is to make you one of those.
Everyone else agree with that, or any other suggestions?
I mean, I'll chime in from the P's perspective that I think, it's really an opportunity thing, that I don't care what your background is, what your attending background is, so much as, just your ability to gain experience. And the reality is you're probably not going to be able to do a lot of those procedures anyway. But if you're there observing it, then you're learning.
Is that your current fellow, Andrew?
That's Crawford, the COVID cat.
We got a COVID dog. There. Sorry.
Go ahead.
There were a couple of interesting questions that just popped in. Our interview dates are fairly set just based on faculty availability. We typically interviews on Wednesdays between like mid-August and end of September-ish, but there may be some flexibility in terms of specific dates, but we always interview on certain dates and times, and so it's just a matter of trying to be respectful for everybody's time. And it's a complicated puzzle piece that our fellowship administrators often have to kind of assemble. So just be aware that, sometimes you may not be able to make an interview if it just doesn't fit your schedule.
So we have about a little more than 10 minutes left. If there's any questions that we haven't gotten to yet, please put them in the chat. I wanted to kind of throw this out there to our panel, and just see if there's anything that hasn't been brought up or you really want to get out there yet, words of wisdom or pearls or something that hasn't been asked yet. I throw that towards you as I monitor the chat for the last 10 minutes or so. Otherwise, I'll call on Ashwin again.
Can I chime in for
yeah, go for it.
Perspective, as Dr. Zaremski also knows, as he knew me as a medical student. I think one of the best things that I come to realize in when applying and thinking about going into the career of sports medicine is a lot of just continuity. As a kind of medical student, I kind of knew I wanted to do sports medicine. It's not as early. Some people don't get that as early as a med student, but as continuity with mentorship is amazing, because to this day I still talk to Dr. Zaremski about like certain stuff, like, hey, can you kind of give me and get some guidance on either CV or just kind of career interests and all that. Mentorship is very key, and when you kind of hold on to that mentor, try to keep in contact, because that mentor can kind of guide you throughout your whole experience as a medical student and as a resident. And that's another thing I wanted to kind of chime in for, a mentor-mentee program that we're going to revamp through the SMRC and the MSIG. I'm going to put in a link for the mentorship application, but it was previously, pre-COVID, there was a mentorship, mentee, mentor kind of program out there that we would have. It would just be a sort of an annual thing that we would see each other during these in-person conferences. But I'm gonna put that link down into the chat.
Yeah, I think that's awesome, Giorgio. Thank you for bringing that up. That's something that I think a lot of us in this panel have, at one point or another at the annual meeting, done that. They used to have, like, kind of, for those of us that remember, they have tables and we kind of chat like at 7 in the morning while we're all having like croissants and orange juice and things like that. But I think as Giorgio mentioned, trying to revamp that. But especially in times when a lot of stuff's been virtual. And if you're not fortunate enough to be at an institution that has a large sports medicine presence, that's okay. And if you can talk with someone or more than one someone and just keep in contact with that person, I think he or she or they can guide you or point you to the right person. I was very fortunate that my program director at Tufts not only knew, well, I don't know if Dr. McInnis is, if Dr. Borgstein is still officially your boss or colleague, but Joanne Borgstein at Harvard Spalding, as well as Brian Kribbeck at UW. And I got very lucky by have someone knowing someone, and then it just kind of went from there. I've been very fortunate knowing Dr. Rao put me in contact with Dr. Asif, and we worked on that project that was on those slides before. So sometimes it's as simple as saying yes to something on an email and then seeing if you're going to complete the project. I think that's a huge thing. I think our faculty would say that too. If we can trust you and you're going to at least complete something and you do good work or try hard in it, especially if it's outside of a clinic setting, I think that is huge, particularly when a lot of stuff, unfortunately, is done via virtual right now for various reasons. There's been a bunch of comments just put in. Let's see here. So Giorgio just put in the link for the mentoring program. For those of you interested, please sign up. You can always, I think, email Giorgio as well. And then there was another question. This is, I think, Ashwin answered it, but also for Dr. Gregory. What about if you have a non-pediatric resident but wants to see pediatric patients? And I'm going to go on a limb and suspect you mean younger than high school, whoever wrote that comment, so the younger than 14. What are your thoughts on that? Obviously, as a pediatrician, those are challenges because sports medicine kind of overlaps a lot with the term adolescence. What does adolescence mean? And we can go into that, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I can only speak for us. Our program is accredited through Pediatrics, and we have an ER track and a primary care track, and so we take all backgrounds. We've never had family medicine to date because we don't have a family medicine residency, but so we have medicine residents who are fellows, and we train them in pediatrics, and we have pediatric residents who are fellows, and we train them in adult medicine. So as you mentioned, you have to be able to take care of all age athletes. And so that's our goal for everybody, is to make sure you're trained in all ages. But I would say the perspective we have is, I'm a pediatrician. I want to make sure you're trained up on the pediatric side and taking care of pediatric fractures. So really it's the whole scope for everybody, regardless.
Yeah, I'd echo what Andrew says. We have, for example, our pediatric fellow covers the Seattle Seawolves, which is the professional rugby club in town, all adults, all grown-ups. And in our clinics, our fellows in pediatrics have both pediatric sports continuity clinics and adult medicine continuity clinics, which are really for sports medicine, which are really all ages. So we don't really differentiate that way, although our peds fellows do get more concentrated peds exposures along the way, and our family med fellows get more adult exposure, just to kind of reflect the training and the hybrid program that we have. So every program is gonna be a little different, but the idea is that I think most of the programs that run pediatric fellowships, honestly, unless they're fully housed in a pediatric setting, and only see adult, kids up to the age of 21, then that might be a limit. But for most other programs, you're going to see everything.
There looks like there's a question just put in. What do you do with the projects that you're working on, or maybe you've got a scholarly project, or it's been submitted, don't know if it's been accepted yet, and you're applying? I was going to ask Melissa. I don't know if Melissa's still on, since she hasn't spoken in a while. If not, I think Sam and Kelly, you're probably next up. How would you go about putting that in? Because we've all seen, like, there's a bunch of stuff that I'm doing research in progress. How would you go about listing that, and what would you be prepared for if you get an interview with that program with that?
I'd have to think about the mechanics of the ERAS application, but I think there are ways to put in things that you're working on, and I think just putting through the progress you've made is good, and it could give you something to talk about in the interview process. I think the key word in the question is important. I think if it's something, when you see a lot of things that aren't completed, that can be a red flag. So I think if something is kind of pertinent to sports medicine and is important, I think I'd have to kind of go through it in my head where you can put it there, but there are places to put that in, as I recall.
One thing I might throw out there is if you put something down from a scholarly project that you just want to put more stuff in, which I think some of us understand, and you get an interview, you better be prepared to talk about it, or release the results, even if it doesn't get accepted to a respective journal. And all of us have been on the end of having to submit to multiple journals. And for those of you who don't know, I mean, it could take a year to get something published, sometimes longer. So we get that, but you better be prepared to be able to talk on the project eloquently and understand what you did. Because if you can't, we can tell that you weren't intimately involved in it. So that's just kind of as a, I guess, a pearl. We have about 5 minutes left. I want to see
just to piggyback on that, Jason.
Go ahead, Kelly. Yeah.
Sorry about that. Just to piggyback on that concept, I couldn't agree more. I'm reading a paragraph about a research project and nothing. I need to see a productive scholarly activity coming from that. And it doesn't have to be a publication. It can be a presentation. It can be a poster. But to me, if you're going to put in a work on a project that's meaningful, something productive has got to come out of it at a national meeting or in a journal. Otherwise, it doesn't mean as much to me to read about, because we're reading about all sorts of projects all the time. And so I like to see the end point, the productivity.
And then, like I said, finally, we're only about 3 or 4 minutes away. I know a lot of people, especially on the East Coast, getting a little bit later, at least for us on the faculty, who this is very late for us. But no, seriously, if there's anything else, the faculty, as well as Giorgio, would like to say, I know Melissa had to run because she has another meeting since it's about 5 or 6 hours behind for her. But is there anything else that hasn't been mentioned or you want to reiterate? We've got 3 minutes left, so anyone can chime in. Or we'll make Dr. Negron answer, we'll pimp Dr. Negron on questions.
I would say take advantage of the fact that a lot of these national meetings are via Zoom or virtual, and so you can go to more meetings than you might have been able to otherwise, so take full advantage.
I think that's great advice. There's also a lot of lectures and content that can help prepare each of you, depending on, no matter where you are in your training, on AMSSM's YouTube feed that were recorded as part of a fellows lecture series that was done this year. And so a lot of great content that's available for free and readily accessible to each of you. The other thing I would just recommend as you approach your candidacies and your as you look into programs is, a lot of our websites we spend a lot of time developing our websites, some programs more than others, but there's a lot of information there. And so if you're really interested in the program, take the time to do your research. And that often starts with going to the website and seeing what content is available to you there to kind of understand the program better. And that will allow you to ask more informed questions when you get to your interview. If you ask questions that honestly are on my website and kind of obvious, then I kind of wonder how much research you've actually done. So it's a way of me kind of gauging your interest in our program to understand how much you've delved in. So for those programs that you're really interested in, I would recommend you kind of doing your homework as best as you can.
I would say outside of doing your homework on the programs is do your homework on yourself. A lot of soul searching, figuring out what you want to do with sports medicine ultimately. Obviously, there are some very distinct levels when it comes to sports medicine and how you practice, when it comes to just divisions of sports or types of sports or whatever. And if a program is going to be able to provide that for you, it's going to be a lot easier to jump from that to what you ultimately want to do. Even if, we all know in medicine, you ultimately don't typically end up at your dream job and your first job out of fellowship. That's understandable. At the same time, if you want to set yourself up to be a professional team, fill in the blank doc, to go to a place that doesn't do much professional coverage, like we just don't have professional teams in West Virginia, really. But we have a great amount of college coverage. So if that's something else you'd rather do, just kind of doing some soul searching on what you ultimately want out of it.
Well, I want to thank everybody. We're still at 89 participants. We're up to 107. I'm guessing the majority are residents, but I think this is fantastic for our younger members or folks who are interested in potentially joining AMSSM. If you have any questions, obviously those of us on the panel usually are pretty good at responding to email. Any of the residents, Dr. Negron is a fantastic resource as your president, and Melissa Jackels as the president for the Medical Student Interest Group. And again, for any of your colleagues, any med students or residents that didn't have the opportunity to participate tonight for various reasons, you could send them the link via YouTube. I think Andy might have put the link into, or Giorgio just did, put the link into the chat because this is being recorded. But again, thank you all for joining. I know a lot of you are switching roles in about 8 days. So good luck to everybody graduating, and have a wonderful evening and stay safe. Thanks, everyone.
See y'all. Thank you for considering sports medicine. It's an awesome field. See ya.
Good night, everyone.